Donald Trump has picked his VP. Is JD Vance the future of MAGA? So at the Republican National Convention, Donald Trump selected JD Vance, senator from Ohio, as his vice presidential candidate. Now, the first thing I think we should get into is who is JD Vance. Do you want to go into that or should I?
Yeah, I got a good amount of info on the guy. So He's a Yale law grad, but his resume goes back much further than that in the public consciousness.
Yeah.
Because he wrote a book titled Hillbilly Elegy. And it's about his escape out of the Appalachia Rust Belt-esque area and then into Yale Law School and how he got out. And so he suffered, his family was extremely poor. His parents were victims of the opioid epidemic. And he struggled with that his entire life. He eventually met a woman that he married and was from a different culture. She's Indian. And after he worked in a hedge fund, he worked in all these different areas. And in 2022, he was elected the junior senator from Ohio. After a fairly contentious Senate primary in Ohio. It was a very, very contentious primary. And Donald Trump was the one who carried him over the finish line.
Yep.
Now, what's notable about that is JD Vance used to be an anti-Trumper. And not just a anti-Trumper, but one of the anti-Trumpers. He's on the record calling Trump America's Hitler. He's on the record calling Trump a threat to everything. He's calling Trump a danger to immigrants, right? He's going off and off against Trump. He said that he was like gonna not vote for Trump in 2016, and apparently he didn't vote for Trump in 2016. So he cozied up to Trump in the 2022 midterm, got the endorsement, and then went on to become the junior senator. And so now he's only 2 years into his first Senate term, and now he's vice president at 38 years old, or future maybe vice president at 38.
I think Vance opposing Trump in the past and now becoming his vice presidential candidate is a huge part, if not the biggest part, of this story. Because every report that has come out about Donald Trump and how he deals with political allies or people on the right is that he prizes loyalty above everything.
Yeah.
Right? And so it would be hard. And we speculated about who Trump's VP pick would be a few weeks ago on the show. Neither of us picked Vance. Part of it, I think, was because Vance had criticized Trump in the past.
I actually said in that video that we made about Trump's VP possible picks was he'll never pick Vance. Vance called him Hitler. And I guess he picked the guy who called him Hitler.
And I think he picked the guy almost because he called him Hitler. Not because, but because he called him Hitler and then came to heel more than any other person in the Republican Party.
No one has been on their knees more to Donald Trump than JD Vance.
Yeah, and I think he just loves the rush of power that Trump feels, knowing that he has this convert, this massive convert.
Yeah.
Right? And someone who feels deference to Trump for his political career as well, because Trump did need to bring Vance across the finish line in Ohio.
Yeah, Vance would not have won. He only won by a point or two.
Yeah,
in the primary, he would not have been the senator if it not for Donald Trump and Vance coming to heel to Donald Trump. I want to talk about what Vance means. Oh, sorry. Do you have one more thing to add on that?
Yeah. Well, I wanted to ask. Besides, do you think why did Trump pick him?
Yeah.
Besides the fact that he's a convert, which I do think is a part of the story.
I'm going to be honest with you. It's actually pretty straightforward. I think he goes on TV a lot, and he sounds really good on TV.
I agree.
And I think Trump loves that.
Yeah.
I think Trump loves that shit. He loves that this guy is young, that he goes on TV all the time, and he admires that about him. And so I think that's what put him over the edge. Also, JD Vance is the most, isolationist Republican senator in the Congress right now. We'll talk about that.
Yeah. Well, I think the idea that this is an ideological pick is a strong one. I think it kind of does signal, as I've read a lot of people say, that Trump feels like the campaign is in a strong place right now, which isn't surprising after the Biden debate performance. But JD Vance isn't someone that you should expect to win over voters that are on a different part of the aisle than Donald Trump is. JD Vance is about as aligned with Trump as you could expect. And Biden responded to, when he was asked about Vance being picked as VP, Biden responded with saying he's basically a copy of Trump on the issues.
He is exactly a copy. Exactly a copy. But honestly, that's not true. Vance is more right. More
think so?
right on social issues. It's not even close. Vance is way further right than Donald Trump on cultural issues.
On which issues?
Abortion. Abortion says, what are we talking about? Vance wants all abortion ended completely. On his website, 2 days before he became VP, he had end all abortion at the top. He's been interviewed about abortion. He has called abortion equal to slavery. He has said, when referencing victims of rape and who get pregnant, he said that two wrongs don't make a right with regards to abortion laws. He has never been for exceptions of abortion in rape or incest, ever. He's never been for that. He is way further right on abortion. He also wants to change the way that we vote in this country. He wants families to get votes based off the number of children that they have. So if you have more children in your household, then you get more votes at the electoral box.
Okay, I'm wondering when all of these statements were made. Because
2021 to now.
Yes, but also there was an interview that he did in 2022 with USA Today where he said abortion is primarily a state issue. And he said Ohio is going to have a different abortion policy from California, from New York, and I think that's reasonable. And the reason this is important is because I think he might have harder line stances than Trump, more rightward stances than Trump, or he might have had them in the past and just be following Trump along like a dog in his positions on the issues.
I mean, he can say he wants it to be a state's issue, but if he's in that state, he's going to vote for no exceptions for rape or incest.
Sure.
Right?
But
where Donald Trump would not. Donald Trump would not vote for that at the state.
He might not vote himself, but he might still implement the policy at the state level.
Well, Trump has said pretty much flatly that if he was in Florida, he would be against the 6-week ban.
Really?
Yes.
Flatly.
He called it a mistake in Kansas, I think.
Yes, but I think he did that for political reasons. I don't know if Trump ideologically is against abortion. I think Trump is ideologically agnostic on abortion.
So then Vance is ideologically against abortion.
Sure, personally,
right.
I think, but I don't know if he's politically against it.
No, I don't agree with that at all. If an abortion ban came across his desk, he would sign it in a heartbeat.
Okay.
Well, and he's literally said that it's equal to slavery.
Okay. Okay. Go ahead. My undercurrent here is just going to be that Vance is a political chameleon. I think he's doing anything he needs to acquire more power.
No, I don't. I think that is a wrong interpretation of him.
Okay.
I think he is an extremely ideological, very, very smart guy. And I think he knows exactly what he wants to do. And I think he's going to do anything to get those things done.
Okay.
He's talked very extensively on like Steve Bannon's podcast, where he's talking about how he wants to dismantle the administrative state and fire every single civil servant in the country and then rehire someone who's loyal to Trump. That's a quote.
Every single civil servant in the country.
I'm not kidding. I'll pull up my phone. If we want to edit this later, we can. This is what he said verbatim. All right, here we go.
Yeah.
This is verbatim. This is the quote.
Okay.
This is the quote. I think Trump is going to run again in 2024, he said. I think that what Trump should do, if I was giving him one piece of advice, fire every single mid-level bureaucrat, every civil servant in the administrative state, and replace them with our people.
Okay. Every civil servant in the administrative state.
Yeah.
Not every single servant in the United States.
Obviously. The people who he's the boss of. The people who he could fire.
Sure.
Yes. So fire everyone that you could fire and replace them with someone who's loyal to you.
Yes. Okay. But again, isn't that just exactly aligned with Trump?
Yeah, sure. Well, that part's exactly aligned with Trump.
Okay.
Yeah.
What do we have to say next?
A lot.
Okay.
So what else does he want to do? He wants to ban no-fault divorce. He's against no-fault divorce as a concept.
Okay.
He talks about that leaving unhappy or even violent marriages didn't work out for the kids, suggesting that people, even when they're trapped in violent marriages, should stay in them to preserve the family stability.
Yeah, that's crazy.
This is the type of guy we're talking about, okay? In July 2022, he told the Mission America, a right-wing Christian organization, that he would have opposed the Respect for Marriage Act. He would have voted against guaranteeing the right of same-sex marriage. He would have voted against that in the Senate. This is a bill that's been passed by the Senate and voted and signed into law by Biden. Vance would not have signed that law. He would not have voted for that law. Vance, let's also talk about his economic and security stuff, because he's extremely nationalistic on both of those things, right?
Yeah.
He's on board with a whole host of tariffs. He is in lockstep with Donald Trump. He wants a 10% across the board tariff on all imports, 60% tariffs on goods from China. We've talked about how that is a crazy and dangerous economic policy.
Yes.
And we'll talk about in depth in a video coming up this week. But he is completely in lockstep with that. On top of that, he wants to devalue the dollar. Now, he wants to devalue the dollar because it makes exports cheaper for other countries. So like France can buy American products for cheaper if our dollar is lower. Well, what that also means is if you care about inflation, then don't vote for Donald Trump because his vice president is explicitly saying he wants your dollar to be worth less.
Yes.
Okay? So that's him on economic isolationism. He's also an isolationist when it comes to security. He is the biggest supporter of keeping Ukraine out of NATO, of stopping sending arms to Ukraine, and he explicitly blames NATO for the entire war in Ukraine. He blames NATO expanding into the Baltic states, into Poland, past the East Germany, and blaming all of Russia's expansionism since the 1990s on Americans accepting states into NATO. Because America didn't conquer these states and magically absorb them into NATO with force. No, Estonia came on their knees and begged America for their protection because Russia was getting war crazy in Georgia. So this is blatantly ahistorical and is a terrible way to view foreign policy. Coming out of Vance's mouth.
It's the Tucker Carlson perspective.
It's literally like Tucker Carlson becoming vice president.
Yeah, it kind of is on at least foreign policy stances, which is frightening.
And what's crazy is it's not like he's anti-war. Vance is not an anti-war candidate. He's just against the Ukraine war because he advocates invading Mexico, just like Donald Trump. They advocate explicitly invading Mexico and crushing the cartels there. They're breaking Mexican sovereignty and going to open war with Mexico if they don't allow the U.S. government to go in and take out the cartels. He also wants to increase pressure on Iran. We just talked about Iran's most recent election, where they elected a reformist. That means that the people inside of Iran do not agree with the hard-line conservative stances being taken by the Ayatollah and the supreme leader. They don't agree. And what Vance says to that is, screw you, we're going to wrap up the pressure, increase your sanctions anyway. We're not going to give you an off-ramp into some type of normalcy. I'm getting pretty heated. It's obvious I don't like Vance or any of his politics. Do you think any of this is bad for Trump politically, being the anti-NATO and all this? Like, for me, I look at it and I'm like, oh, he just lost the moderate Republican vote. But do you think any of that matters?
No.
I
think that's making much too much out of this. I mean, because I think we almost forget how much Trump has said on the record to elucidate how bad his policies would be if everything he said came true.
Right.
That we now take for granted that he's just not. He's either you already believe he's going to ruin the country, and there's no way you're going to vote for him, and you're going to vote against him, or you think he's not going to enact the policies that he's the furthest extreme versions of the policies that at some point he's articulated in his political career.
Sure.
And I think they're going to view Vance the same way. And I think Vance is going to moderate, and Vance is going to go on TV and talk his way around his most extreme things that he said in his political career.
Yeah.
So that this isn't going to matter.
Yeah. And I think that's where we come in, is that we can't let him get away with that. Right?
But, I mean, I suppose, but don't you think it's... I think we almost discredit ourselves by implying that the most extreme stances that Vance has ever had would become policy if a Trump-Vance ticket made it to the White House.
Then how would you ever examine someone's policy if you don't take what they say for what they want?
I guess what I'm trying to think is, like, I think it's still worth it to make decisions based on this, but treat it more directionally than absolutely.
That's totally fine.
And so make it as like clearly Vance leans towards a more isolationist stance.
Yeah.
Clearly Vance thinks we don't really have a place in Ukraine.
Right.
We don't really. There's no real reason for us to be supporting Ukrainians. That alone, so he's going to move us away from that. He's going to move us away from support of the European continent. He's going to move us away from opposition of Russia. That should be reason enough to oppose the ticket. But again, we already knew that about Trump.
Right.
So I think all of this is difficult for me on a policy stance to see what kind of difference we're really getting.
Yeah. And I mean, like, VPs basically have no power anyway.
Exactly.
VPs are totally irrelevant.
Yes.
Most times VP picks don't even make a difference in regards to the political outcomes of it.
They don't.
I think what they do is they paint the picture of what the party wants to be. That's what I think. I think Trump is setting up his successor. He's like, oh, I want someone just like JD Vance to come after me. Someone who believes all of these things.
So I've seen that take, and I go back and forth on it. I can see it happening because I think Trump might see Vance as, again, very articulate. He comes off as very smart. He's like, he's telegenic. I would like this guy to be seen as my successor. I would like to be seen as the one who chose this guy.
Yeah.
But on the other hand, everything that I have projected onto Trump's psyche tells me that he can't possibly care or be thinking about that.
Right.
He just seems far too selfish, far too interested in the power for himself. So it's hard for me to get on board with that. The one other thing that I think this might matter, or the way that I think Trump might be seeing it politically, is that this guy is the author of Hillbilly Elegy. This guy is the one who supposedly articulated the struggle of the Rust Belt, of these Midwestern swing states that were left behind when we outsourced all of our manufacturing overseas.
Yeah.
And he's the one who knows how to speak on it to really resonate with people.
Yeah.
And so I think he's making somewhat of a calculation that Vance is going to help him win those groups.
I agree.
In the Midwest. I don't know if it's true.
Right. Well, that's the real question. Is it true? And JD Vance has this somewhat aura about him. Like he is some speaker to the Midwest person who lost their job from NAFTA. And it's just so not the case.
Yeah.
And it makes me mad when people claim that JD Vance is populist, because he doesn't deserve that label. You're not a real populist if you have the politics of JD Vance. Now, what do I mean by that, right? He claims himself as an economic populist. Well, when he's on the record and he's asked, do you think that right-to-work laws are good? He says, I'm skeptical about them. He's not against right-to-work laws. It's not a blatant instant reaction saying, oh, right-to-work laws kill the ability for unions to organize, and every union across the country hates right-to-work laws because it guts them out of very necessary funding for, the jobs that they do. No, he doesn't say that. He says, I'm skeptical. Does he stand in support of Protect the Right to Organize Act? No. He doesn't support the Protect the Right to Organize Act. He doesn't support it. You can't be pro-union and then be anti the PRO Act. That makes no sense. That means you're lying. It means you're lying.
No, I want to give context. Because
You're so massively wrong on this.
No, I think you're getting too hooliganist.
You're so wrong.
Okay. Vance told Politico he did not support the PRO Act because the bill would codify collective bargaining in its current form, and that the U.S. should push for sectoral bargaining or industry-wide organizing. The PRO Act would not prevent sectoral bargaining, and labor advocates contend the bill could enable broader labor reforms. Vance also rejected the bill for overtly political reasons. Quote, I think it's dumb to hand over a lot of power to a union leadership that is aggressively anti-Republican.
That's insane.
But my point is the pure stance that, yes, you could say it is not false that he's against the PRO Act. But that's not the whole story.
What's the whole story?
The reasoning and exactly what he's saying here is still populist. Him being a Republican team member and wanting to position himself in a way that is still pro-labor, in that he wants sectoral bargaining, but he doesn't want to give a Democratic win.
When you say sectoral bargaining, that goes against so if you're saying that he wants sectoral bargaining, if that's what he says, that means he basically wants a repeal of the National Labor Relations Act, because the National Labor Relations Act is not about sectoral bargaining. The entire NLRB focuses on industry bargaining. That's how every election works.
I mean,
that's how all of it works.
Could you imagine that the NLRB was changed to be more about sectoral bargaining? I don't know if getting caught up in the details of how the administrative state would need to adapt to sectoral bargaining really attacks his position very much.
But when every union in the entire country supports the PRO Act, and then you say, no, I'm against it, doesn't that make you anti everything that the unions stand for?
No, clearly not. Like,
What do you mean clearly
at
not? He
least
has a
based on what he's
0%
saying.
voting record from the AFL-CIO. He's never voted in favor of a union-endorsed piece of legislation in his entire tenure in Congress.
I think that's a good point. I'm just saying that I think if he was, I'm not sure that if he was dictator, he would want to do away with all labor rights. I think he just wants it to be Republican wins.
Okay.
He wants it to be framed as not a win for the Biden administration.
And so I can say that and say that he's anti-union, because that should not be in your calculation when you're talking about labor rights. And the fact that that's even in someone's mind when they're talking about labor rights means that they don't give a shit about it.
Okay. I think that's fair.
Right? Like if you're making your political calculation about unionization based off of no, I don't want to give the Democrats too much power.
Yeah.
What are you on about? It's not about that. It's about making sure that the people inside of that workplace, whether they vote for a Democrat or they vote for a Republican, is getting their fair representation and getting a fair wage for the work they do.
Yes. So I think it's a good point to say, like, however he's positioning himself, he's not actually doing any work to help organize labor.
He's doing nothing to organize labor. When I say like not doing any, he's like literally doing
working
nothing
against it.
He is actively working against it.
Yes.
It's actually crazy to me that you just mentioned that sectoral bargaining thing, because that's an old Republican talking point from the 40s. That's from the conservative wing of the American Federation of Labor against the CIO, the Congress of Industrial Organizations.
Yeah.
And then FDR sided with the CIO back in the 30s.
Okay.
This is like way back stuff that he's talking about.
Yeah.
Which again shows me he's very educated on these topics.
Sure.
So,
well, I also think part of why I don't want to give him the benefit of the doubt. I don't think he has good policy stances, but even AOC has given him, and we've talked about how we can give him credit, for example, for being good on antitrust.
Yes, he is very good on antitrust.
And I think there's a reason, and I think it's valid to consider a through line of him wanting to reduce corporate power and raise worker power.
I don't believe that he wants to reduce corporate power.
So why is he hard on antitrust?
That's one area where he's good on reducing corporate power.
Yes.
That's one area. But he also wants to reduce the corporate tax rate from 21% to 15%. He wants to get rid of the tax on stock buybacks and repeal the entirety of the Inflation Reduction Act because of that specific reason. So when we talk about reducing corporate power, no, he's good on antitrust. I give him that. But when he wants to give a larger tax cut to corporations and then lower their taxes on their own stock buybacks that limits investment into worker wages, no, I'm not going to let you say that. I'm not going to let him say that he is anti-corporation. You know what? I am emotionally charged. I am. And I'll take that. But the reason I'm emotionally charged is people like AOC, Elizabeth Warren, and Bernie Sanders have a long history of fighting against corporations in a variety of ways. Legislation that they've co-sponsored, that they've advocated for. Vance has done almost none of that. And the press coming out and saying that Vance is an economic difference from Trump when he supports practically everything that Trump did in his first term that was the most pro-corporate since Ronald Reagan. I hate that framing, and it gets me mad that Vance is given that framing.
You just think it's unfair.
It's just wrong. It's unfair and wrong.
Yeah, I guess I just think there's something to the fact that AOC, one of those people you cited, has said that she can work with Vance on some of this exact stuff.
Totally. You can absolutely work with Vance, Josh Hawley on some of these things.
Yes.
But some shouldn't give them the label of anti-corporate. That's where I'm coming from, I guess. That he might be anti-corporate for Republican standards, and I think that is true. JD Vance is anti-corporate for Republican standards, and that is going to isolate the moderate Republican voters like Romney or people who look back on the Reagan administration fondly. Vance is not for that, okay? But Vance is also not equal to Joe Biden's record on unions.
Correct.
And so when I hear in the media it getting equated as if, oh, the union issue is off the table now because they're both pro-union, that's not true.
Yeah.
And so that's where I get emotionally heated because I feel like part of the record of Vance is getting wiped away.
Yeah. And I think you could also bring up the fact that Vance is a former Silicon Valley tech bro.
Yeah.
And that he's one of his few, he has huge fans in David Sachs, in Elon Musk, and people who are some of the most anti-union on the record humans that exist in the United States.
Yep.
You can point to that as a reason to be skeptical of his stance on unions. Not to mention, what really matters is that he's the VP pick.
Right.
And it doesn't matter.
It doesn't.
It matters that it doesn't matter.
Yes.
So
yes, it's really the media narrative that I'm getting angry about.
Yes, and that
because it's frustrating when there may be Pennsylvania voters in Erie County who see the headline Vance economic populism breaking the Republican narrative when he literally supports 97% of every Republican Party initiative in the past 20 years. It's not fair. It's not accurate, and you're painting a bad picture.